You're number one on the list because we talked about this before, the issue that you're probably the least respected and known planet killer. Geoengineering is wreaking havoc all over the planet. And but let's look at this from your first of all from your background. Can you sort of give me an autobiography of yourself and sort of what got you moving in this direction?
I am a former employee of Bechtel Power Corporation. This goes back quite some time, but I worked on one of the first renewable energy plants in the continental U.S. And my move to the Pacific Northwest was to try to find clean air. My home is completely off-grid. I have wind, solar, and hydro. It was the cover article for the world's largest renewable energy magazine. When I began to utilize my solar system as a primary source of power and was losing on some days 60 to 70 to 80% of my solar uptake from whatever these aircraft were leaving behind, these massive grid patterns, clearly something was going on in the airspace. Research quickly led me to the subject of geoengineering. I looked for primary elements used in geoengineering patents. I tested rainfall, which gives an indication of what's in the air column above. I found the primary elements, aluminum, barium. Subsequent tests had escalating elements of these metals, or escalating levels of these metals, and until within 5 years, Brian, we had rain tests go from 7 parts per billion of aluminum to 3,450 parts per billion. We're talking about highly toxic rain. So I was simply faced with this battle. I'm not an activist in any way. I never have been. I'm not politically oriented, but this is simply a battle that once one realizes the gravity of it, that we're breathing this in with every breath, how do you not engage in this fight?
Now, Dane, maybe you could explain to the listener where you were living. It used to be a beautiful place to live. I think things have changed since then, eh?
They've changed radically. I'm on the east side of Lake Shasta in Shasta County, California. 10 years ago, this northern latitude boreal forest was absolutely thriving. It's a boreal rainforest. Our normal annual rainfall here where I live is 69 inches. That's a lot of rain.
Wow.
So we've gone from a very thriving forest to a silent, radically declining ecosystem with very little life, very few birds, very few berries, no berries on some of the primary sources of foliage. And it's a complete overturning, Brian. In 10 years, it's astounding the die-off that has happened here, and it's accelerating by the day.
Wow. And what sort of trees are we dealing with in this forest?
This is what makes this even more profound. I did a lot of research before I moved here. This is one of the most resilient, robust ecosystems on the planet because it's been used to extremes in all directions. So we have about 7 or 8 species of oak. We have many forms of conifer. We have Doug fir, ponderosa pine, sugar pine, gray pine. It's a hugely diverse forest, so it's extremely resilient, or has been. But again, the die-off is absolutely radical here. It's truly heartbreaking to watch.
So would this be similar to the forests in northern Canada that are being taken apart by the spruce bud worm or whatever?
Well, we have beetle issues here in the fir trees especially. But again, the beetle is a symptom, and this is where so much of academia, so many agencies, like in the U.S. here, we have the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Forest Service, and truly these quote-unquote experts in these agencies are paid to make the public believe that whatever's happening is some natural consequence. They do not look at core causes. In fact, something I've shared numerous times, but it's important. Some months back, I was in the forest with congressional reps and USDA scientists staring at a hillside full of stone-dead trees. And I asked in front of this group to the USDA scientists, did they see forest decline happening? And he looked at this hillside of dead trees and he said no. And I walked away from the group shaking my head at that point. I mean, when these experts start to say that up is down, black is white, and day is night, where do we go with that? And these people simply need to be held responsible. The reason we are in the corner we are in is because so many people have completely sold any shred of integrity they may once have had in exchange for a paycheck. In the meantime, the whole ship goes down. So even though right now we are statistically in free fall into the sixth great mass extinction, with statistics coming in from everywhere, the ocean die off, boreal forest die off, 30% boreal forest mortality in Alaska, forests are dying around the globe, animals are washing up on beaches all over the globe, and yet, we have almost no discussion of this. And if this doesn't change quick, we'll have nothing left to say.
The, excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. So all levels of life form are being affected by this. I think you've done studies on the amount of microbes and smaller life forms in the rivers and things of that sort as well.
We do have some statistics on that. In fact, in Northern California, as aquatic insect life is measured by Forest Service biologists, 90% decline in 10 years. Same percentage with terrestrial insects. It's a virtual crash. Therefore, the birds have nothing to eat. It goes right up the food chain. We are talking about a virtual crash. And again, if we look at climate engineering as a whole, and for your listeners that aren't quite clear on what this is, any attempt to manipulate Earth's natural climate system is climate engineering. And many things fall into that category, including weather warfare, which we know is going on. There's no question about it. It's historical fact. So we can only have bad consequences from this type of intervention. And it doesn't take real genius to conclude that putting thousands of aircraft in the sky a day, dumping tens of millions of tons of toxic metal particles and chemicals into the atmosphere annually, and that number is stated by the world's most recognized geoengineer, David Keith, the goal of putting 20 million tons of nano aluminum particulates into the atmosphere annually. We're talking about an incomprehensible amount of material. That's about 1,000 tanker loads a day with 60 to 70 tons per load. Not to mention the jet fuel. These tankers burn about a gallon a second. So, and all this falls down to the surface. Go ahead.
Yeah. Dane, when did he say this, David Keith? Because he's talked about spraying sulfuric acid, too, in recent books.
This is what gets more interesting with Keith. If you look at an international conference, an AAAS conference in 2010, which I attended, about 3 questions were allowed. Mine was 1. This is on film, on the record. It's in the film Look Up. It's in the film Why in the World Are They Spraying?
Dane, what's AAAS mean, just for the audience?
It's a science conference organization, and I can't remember what their particular acronym stands for. It's a science conference. This particular conference was in LA. There's a number of these science groups, and that acronym I can't repeat to you verbatim, so I won't try. But people can Google. If they Google AAAS, they'll find that acronym. And on film at this particular conference, David Keith, after a 3.5-hour symposium about the use of aluminum nanoparticulates in the atmosphere, had made no mention of the consequences of that. So I confronted him with that. His first response was, this is again on film, on the record, anybody can watch this exchange. He stated, "Oh, we've looked at the atmosphere and there's a lot of particulates there already." I'm paraphrasing.
I think we're going to have a commercial break here, Dane. Okay. We're back on the air now, Dane. You still with me?
Still with you.
All right. So we were chatting about the incredible amount of particulates, toxic particulates, being unleashed on the planet on a daily basis. Now, can you get back into that for me?
I will. In fact, that conference was in San Diego, California, in February of 2010. It's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And at that conference, again, this is on film, on the record. In fact, if people just Google David Keith, Dane Wigington, they'll probably find a number of posts where that particular clip is located. But I cornered Keith on, had any studies been done on the effect of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates into the atmosphere annually. His first response, paraphrase, was, "There's a lot of junk in the air already, a little more won't hurt." Before they could cut me off, I got in again and said that junk in the atmosphere, the existing particulates, are not alumina. And he backed up and became very careful, and he said, "Let me clarify, we haven't studied this. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know." So this is a sort of seat of your pants attitude in the quote-unquote science community. Just like we had with nuclear bombs, they detonated without really knowing what would happen initially. So later, Keith now has changed what he is disseminating. In fact, like when he got on Stephen Colbert, people can Google David Keith, Stephen Colbert, he completely altered his equation down to 20,000 tons of sulfur into the atmosphere, dropped the aluminum mention completely, because the power structure, I think, realized that nobody is going to accept 20 million tons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere publicly. So they're constantly changing their message, constantly changing their game, if you will, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's so outrageous, Dane. I find it hard to convince people, especially those who actually believe that our military is doing good things, and because this, to me, I'm not sure what your opinion is, but this is part of the military-industrial complex agenda. Is that how you see it?
There's nobody else on the planet that's capable of running these programs. There's no question. The DoD is at the top of these programs, period. And what I would say to our military brothers and sisters, and I've talked to many of them, and those that are not ideologically challenged are quite aware and becoming increasingly aware that they are being used for pawns in a planetary destruction on many fronts. So what I have stated over the last 10 years, that certainly those in our military that are engaged in these programs are being told that they're doing something for the common good. But that only goes so far. At a certain point, those that are flying jets and contributing to the handling of these materials and these systems, at some point, they do bear responsibility. That they have enough access to information to realize what they're participating in. So at some point, those in our military who are perhaps not involved with these programs or are becoming aware have a responsibility to hold to account those in the military who are involved with these programs. The plausible deniability only goes so far if you're being told you're doing something good, but clearly you have enough evidence to know you're doing something horrifically harmful. At a certain point, there's responsibility.
Well, I think they're being told like lies, like you're actually helping to cool the planet down, that these releases are there to help the planet.
Yes, I do believe that's exactly the narrative they're given. But again, all I would argue is that at a certain point, they do bear responsibility. Just like the pilots dumping Agent Orange on their own soldiers in Vietnam, or those who gave our own soldiers instructions to go out and watch the nuclear explosion with a set of goggles on as if that will protect them, or those who are making depleted uranium ammunition that have sickened perhaps several 100,000 of our own soldiers. So again, at a certain point, there needs to be responsibility no matter what you're told. You have to use your sense of reason. They take an oath to protect the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So that means they have a responsibility to have some understanding of what they're doing and whether it's for the common good or not, no matter what they're told.
So, Dane, but, what makes it matters worse is that the spraying, the release of these toxins, these fine nanoparticles that basically go everywhere in us, around us, in nature, in other life forms, probably in the microbes, and you name it. These releases are also accompanied by some other fairly sophisticated technologies, one of them being HARP. Can you explain how that fits into this whole scenario of geoengineering?
Most have heard of the HARP acronym, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. That doesn't really mean much to anybody, and that's by design. A lot of the terms they use are to try to confuse people, but HARP is an ionosphere heater. There are 2 to 3 dozen major ground-based facilities like the HARP facility in Glaucona, Alaska. HARP can beam 3.5 billion watts of power into the ionosphere. That causes an electrical chain reaction, heats the ionosphere. On the best available data, can heat the ionosphere to 15,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more. That causes a bulge in the atmosphere that can help to steer the jet stream. Now, when you combine several dozen of these facilities, what are their capabilities? And we know enough, we have enough data to say their capabilities are immense. And this goes hand in hand, Brian, with the spraying. The spraying of conductive metal particulates makes the atmosphere more conductive. It has to. Atmospheric conductivity over the continental U.S. has been measured as much as 400% higher than historical norms. So that makes these signals more effective. So when we have satellite imagery of a jet stream coming west to east across the Pacific and hitting what looks like a wall off the California coast, I mean, this stream of moisture literally hits a point where it splits in 2 different directions. We have incredible footage of this on our website. Look under the HARP report on our website, and they can literally put high pressure zones where they want, block the jet stream, steer it, and all this is having an incredibly horrific effect on the atmosphere. How could it not? So when you have these ionosphere heaters coupled with the aerosol spraying, I mean, you can't not conclude at this point that the entire climate system has been completely derailed, and we really are in uncharted territory now.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Dane, I love your website. It's full of incredibly useful information, and I think it's very credible. Maybe you should just throw that out to people so they know where most of your information can be found.
I'm lead researcher in administration for geoengineeringwatch.org, geoengineeringwatch.org. Our site is non-political. We don't sell anything. We're simply trying to help sound the alarm. So everything we post is to try to give people tools to help educate those around them. Again, as you stated in the beginning of the show, Brian, this issue is not widely known. A lot of people are focused on a lot of things that will not matter if we don't address climate engineering. So in addition to all the things we've mentioned, the fact that we are all breathing in these toxic metal particulates, and all statistics with human health that we would associate with this are going off the scale. We have lab tests from around the globe, so we're not guessing that this stuff is coming down on us and we're breathing it. But at any point in time, with these spray operations already fully deployed, if that mix is changed, if it's altered, if biological testing is indeed going on, at any point in time, those in power could literally level the playing field. And this is a real possibility people should consider.
Yeah, okay. Can you go into more specifics about HARP in terms of what the installations look like? I've seen something in a lot of geoengineering in an area of Canada. It's Prince Edward County, which is sort of halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, our capital city. It's kind of like an island peninsula. And there's a huge facility there, and it looks like it has all this low sort of radar, kind of like a lot of wires connecting radar, different, like I thought it was more of a low wave energy transmission system that they use for like submarines and whatnot. But is that what a typical HARP structure or field looks like a radar facility?
Yes, the land-based facilities. It's an ELF frequency, extra low frequency. They can manipulate that. They can directionally face their signal as well. But you also have SBX radar, sea-based X-band radar. And people can Google this. Again, I think it would be quite astounding to see some of the pictures. If they Google SBX radar, you'll see what almost looks like something out of a science fiction movie. It looks like a massive golf ball on an immensely huge oil derrick. And these are mobile facilities. So we really don't know how many facilities they have. And what you have here, Brian, overall is a runaway cancer of total unchecked insanity. That's what we have. We have programs going on for decades above our heads that are literally destroying Earth's life support systems, toxifying everything. And we see the progression of statistics with this. We see with autism, for example, in 1975, official statistics 1 in 5,000. 39 years later, in 2014, we have 1 in 47. That's a phenomenal increase.
Wow.
It's a 10,000% increase, 10,000% plus. Now we have statistics from MIT stating on the current trajectory, 1 in 2 will have autism in 10 years. So again, this constant exposure to what they're spraying, and there's a lot of sources of atmospheric pollution. I grant that. I mean, we're destroying our planet from so many directions, it's hard to keep track. But mathematically speaking, there is no greater, no more an all-encompassing source of this contamination than the aerosol spraying.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're doing so many things wrong. I've got a list of 8 planet killers. Number 2 on my list is radiation, and no, I'm not convinced that Fuku alone is killing all life in the Pacific, but it's definitely going down big time in terms of the variety of species now living in areas that are usually full of life. There's a huge decline in all species, and there's a great video on my site on this, which is called World Renovation Project. And I don't have my new site, I Am Nature, up yet, but right now it's on World Renovation Project, which is a Facebook site. So, yeah, I mean, excuse me, it's hard to track. I mean, it blows my mind that they can find people to do this kind of stuff. I mean, it's one thing to, like, get off on, bombing people. I'm sure you can convince people that that's somehow fun. But what's the I don't know. I mean, I just say I think that they're telling them it's helping the planet. And my concern is, as conditions get worse, they're gonna advocate for even more of it.
Oh, they already are, because conditions are getting worse rapidly. I don't know if you saw the headline, but today's headline on the New York Times: 2014 was the hottest year ever recorded on our planet, even without an El Nino. That has never happened before. Now, if people watch, for example, the Weather Channel, many people think that if that's the headlines on a mainstream paper, then the opposite must be true. But in this case, that's not the scenario we have. We've had mainstream media trying desperately to hide the fact that the planet is not just warming, it's in total meltdown, and climate engineering is making it worse, not better. Overall, they can and are cooling down large regions of real estate at the cost of making the overall warming worse. Anybody who looks back at my disseminations, my public lectures, will see that I have focused again and again and again on the fact that they have very directly engineered cool downs in the eastern half of the North American continent, where the greatest U.S. population resides, in order to confuse and divide the American population as to the true state of the climate. That is reflected today in the New York Times article and data from NOAA and NASA. The most anomalously cold place in the whole world is the eastern half of the lower 48. Now, how can that be? Because that's where they have focused their engineered cool downs. But the cost of these cool downs is a worsened overall warming. So you said they may ramp it up. They are ramping it up, because what they have done is changed upper level wind currents in order to achieve these engineered cool downs. That in turn alters ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping straight up the Atlantic seaboard into the Arctic. That's thawing methane on the seafloor. Methane's releasing to the atmosphere. And methane is an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. And now, of course, what I'm outlining is that part of that methane release has been triggered by climate engineering. The very mechanism by which they're selling us as a means to cool the planet has actually made the warming worse, not better. And methane over a 30 to 60 day time frame can be hundreds of times more potent than CO2. Methane release is happening now, and they are ramping up. Back to your original question, Brian, they are ramping up radically around the globe right now.
So you're saying they got the teleology all mixed up. They think it's the release of CO2 that's creating these problems, and the use of fossil fuels, etc. But when they ignore the fact that this huge amount of release of toxins and reflective materials is really doing a lot of damage, I would think more so than the release of CO2. What's your opinion on that one?
Well, let's put some math to that. The CO2 is a problem. Many people want to believe it's not. It is. Climate engineering is a bigger problem still. So if we look at a previous past global extinction, the PETM event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago, we had a CO2 escalation that occurred over about 20,000 years. About 2 billion tons annually of excess CO2 was going into the atmosphere. We're putting 36 billion tons annually, and this is the biggest and of all, and we have rendered the planet incapable of responding to that in any way because of geoengineering. With the excess CO2 and the excess rain, the boreal forests would be thriving without geoengineering. But now geoengineering has shredded the ozone layer. The rain is toxic. It's disrupting the hydrological cycle. So instead of the forests trying to compensate for that excess CO2, now the forests are dying. Instead of boreal forests being a carbon sink, now they're a carbon source. They're emitting carbon. Shredded ozone layers killing plankton. Plankton absorb a tremendous amount of CO2. So this is, again, the pharmaceutical approach to a problem. And how many of those commercials do we see that, you know, take this for one thing, and there's, by the way, there's 50 other things that are all far worse than the original problem it claimed to cure. So it's a complex problem. CO2 is definitely an issue because we were putting 100 million tons. Excuse me. We're putting 100 million tons a day into the atmosphere. 100 million. David Keith's original proposal of 20 million tons of aluminum annually. Compare that to 100 million tons a day, or 36 billion tons a year. So CO2 is not nearly as big a problem as the methane, but there's a lot more CO2. But methane, mathematically, there's enough methane in the East Siberian shelf of the Arctic to exterminate the planet, life on Earth, 100 times over, mathematically.
Right. Now, Dane, let's get back to basics here. So a lot of people are being told that the plumes that, exist as a plane flies by, the exhaust is basically, regular exhaust. It's nothing to be concerned about. Some of it goes away quick, some of it takes forever, and some of it gets like a I guess the term you don't like to use anymore is chemtrail, but that's the one I find most comfortable saying. So can you explain the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail?
Well, first of all, to answer your last question first, the reason that the science terms are important is because if we want to lead people to this issue, and we want them to see it's credible, and I know the chemtrail term sounds most descriptive, but they have intentionally marginalized that term. So if people Google chemtrails, they find conspiracy theory and hoax. If they Google solar radiation management, climate engineering, geoengineering, they find hard science data. So that's why that term is important. The difference between a, quote, condensation trail and a particulate trail is immense. And as far as the debate about this, there should be no debate. We have film footage of military tankers spraying at altitude, taken up close behind these aircraft, turning on and off, in some cases with the nozzles visible. There's no debate that they are spraying. And when we also know, Brian, that a high bypass turbofan jet engine, there's a 20-minute tutorial on our site about this, that engine is basically a fan. 85% of the air that passes through that engine is non-combusted. It's almost incapable of making a condensation trail except under the most extreme circumstances, and that would be an extremely short-lived trail, 15, 30 seconds, almost transparent. That engine is completely different than fighter jet engines, which are low bypass turbofans. So again, we would not have grid patterns one day and nothing the next with similar atmospheric conditions if we were looking at condensation trails. We would not have trails that turn on and off, look like as they were sliced with a knife. I mean, it's an instant start-stop of these trails. And this material coming down in the ground, again, matches the patents exactly. We have governments around the globe, including our own, saying we need to geoengineer immediately. We have the entire science community talking about this issue. We have solar obscuration now, global dimming. I don't know if you've heard that term. Your listeners should familiarize themselves with global dimming. We have
many times.
Have you heard that term, Brian?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. So 25% of the sun's direct rays are no longer reaching the surface of the planet. That's the express goal of solar radiation management. So again, there's every single dot in this equation connects, and we have film footage of it happening. So there really shouldn't be a debate. It's a debate that would be an equivalent debate as whether or not there's a flat Earth at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm constantly talking to my family about these issues, and it's frustrating because people believe the news. People believe the weatherman. In Canada, I don't watch the Weather Channel much, but we have we have the Weather Channel up here, and they're talking about 8 types of new clouds. Wow, they discovered 8 types of new clouds. Well, I'm telling you, these are geoengineering clouds. Don't you agree?
They absolutely are. That's, in fact, one that's very common now is undulatus apparatus, named in 2008. And this is because this cloud is appearing now because the atmosphere is stratifying, it's layering, because climate engineering halts convection. And we get clouds that we would not otherwise have. And part of that layering is how they're creating the cool downs on the surface. These are very shallow layers of cold air that drop the mercury, create a lot of headlines. They can chemically ice nucleate snow. And so we have many clouds that we would not otherwise see. The clouds are being seeded with chemical ice nucleating agents. The atmosphere and the climate system has been completely derailed. There is no natural weather at this point. So those that would like to think that there is because they see a natural cloud in some place, when you affect the entire system, then everything downstream is affected. So we can't truly call anything natural. And Brian, if I may, tying this back to Fukushima, if I can,
sure.
tying Fukushima together with climate engineering, and I'm reading right now from an MIT observational report.
I think we're going to go for a break here, Dane. We'll continue after the break.
Center, reaching a maximum 3 days before the quake struck. At the same time, satellite observations showed a big increase in infrared emissions from above the epicenter, which peaked in the hours before the quake. In other words, the atmosphere was heating up. We know from available science data that the transmissions from radio frequency transmitters like HARP can be bounced off the atmosphere back down into the strata, and that in a seismically sensitive zone, if enough power is concentrated, they can create seismic activity. Now, when we know we had that type of heating before the quake happened, is that not a signature of ionosphere heaters being used to actually trigger that quake? Is that a possibility? The data says yes, it's extremely possible. Now, if we look at the geopolitical issues, Japan was starting to align with its regional partners before that happened. So again, we can't prove something like this, but when we have institutions like MIT citing something that cannot be explained, an atmospheric heating that cannot be explained, infrared emissions from directly above the epicenter before the quake, which is exactly what we would expect if that kind of power was located in that manner, then what are we to believe? That these tools are perhaps being used for unbelievable cataclysms around the planet?
Dane, have you seen the bill that was put forward back? I believe it was in 2001 or 2002. It was put. I'd have to look it up, but I know this is for real, as real can be. There was a congressman who said, "I don't think we should be spending money on weapons that create geoengineering, that can create earthquakes, that can create tidal waves, space-based weapons systems." I mean, honest to God, the stuff in this way back over 10 years ago, it just blows the mind. And this bill went to hearing, it went to committee, and the good old Defense Department got its way, and it was squashed. But no, I mean, there is solid evidence that the Defense Department in the U.S. and who knows where else are involved in all sorts of nefarious weapons that transcend this planet.
Well, again, those who think otherwise are simply in denial. We have enough historical documentation to prove. We have about 18 instances of the U.S. military experimenting with pathogens on innocent populations. Why would we think otherwise? How many examples do we need? They're using depleted uranium, which is contaminating our own troops, Agent Orange, our own troops. You know, that the insanity is so far off the rails, and those who deny it are simply in denial. So what we face now, Brian, is consequences that will be total if we stay on this track. Mathematically, on the current track, short-term total global extinction is a mathematical certainty. Those who roll their eyes and walk away, enjoy your denial. You won't be able to stay there very long. If we don't wake up and face what's happening, all of us, we have no chance mathematically, none. Right now we're losing 200 species a day, 200 plus to extinctions of plant and animal. It's 10,000 times the background rate. We're getting more reports every single day of die-off that's absolutely cataclysmic around the globe. And now we're also seeing, Brian, what appears to be instances of H2S, hydrogen sulfide gas, which we would expect as the methane releases, hydrogen sulfide can release with it. Methane is lighter than air, it floats into the atmosphere. Hydrogen sulfide stays on the surface. From January 1st through, I believe, January 6th, in Seattle, Washington, there were reports of a very odorous fog drifting in off the ocean. And of course, the authorities have no explanation. They never do. But it smelled like rotten eggs. This is what we would expect. And all these major fish die-offs, where they all float to the surface, the radiation can't kill the fish that quickly. When they die in that manner, whole massive hundreds of thousands at once, that's indication of anoxic or hypoxic zones that are generally associated with seabed releases of methane and hydrogen sulfide. This is gassing from around the globe. And again, if it continues, if the methane release continues, the planet will mathematically resemble Venus in a very, very short time. And I encourage people to Google Venus syndrome and investigate what I'm saying.
There's also a very credible paper released by the U.S. Air Force, basically stating that their goal is to control the weather by the year 2025. It's part of it's considered a weapon system.
It is. And in fact, I encourage people to Google that as well. And if they say 2025, that means they've already controlled the weather for 2 or 3 decades. I mean, this is just how the system operates. And when we know that these mechanisms are in place, we know this material is coming down to the surface. We have film footage of it happening. We have the top U.S. military brass, and I want people to investigate everything I'm saying. We have the top U.S. military brass stating on the record, climate change is the greatest national security threat of all. We would be incredibly ignorant to believe that they are not fully deploying these programs for a very long time. Incredibly ignorant.
Yeah, I know, and what's scary is that what they're trying to do is exacerbating the situation instead of dealing with it. And that's exactly where correct. I've had some pretty severe run-ins with people who don't want to accept this issue. Although I must admit, your movies are awesome. And I turned one guy who was basically a global warmer only to recognize that, hey, no, there's some validity to this stuff. So you turn one guy around, at least, and I'm sure you've done many, and you're an excellent presenter. I recommend anybody who's, do you have a schedule on your website of when you make appearances, Dane?
I don't. My schedule is in flux right now. The next presentation I'll give is in Southern California. It's called California Jam. I believe Alex Jones will be there as well. It's a 3,000-seat auditorium, but right now, the only other presentations they're all posted, and at this point, those have the data that's there is current and it's applicable, so people can use that. On the global warming end, Brian, for those that are trying to wake others up on that issue, you really can't have a legitimate discussion about global warming without including this issue. The planet certainly is warming; it's in meltdown. But we have a whole climate science community that is in total denial about the climate engineering issue because, one, it's a bad career decision. To address climate engineering as a reality is a very bad career decision, or even worse. So we have avoidance in the climate science community because of that. We have avoidance of the issue in the environmental arenas because it's a very bad decision for their 501 nonprofit. They do not want to lose their nonprofit, so they do not talk about this issue. Same is true with the religious institutions. They don't want to lose their nonprofits, so they don't talk about this issue.
Yeah, that's how we control everything. Get out the money god. We all obey the money god. It's basically it's our survival instinct. And unfortunately, it's going to survive us right into the grave. We don't smarten up soon. Okay, now one of the reasons I started I Am Nature was to try to help people like you garner support out there. Not only from people directly to your organization and your efforts, but also to try to create some synergies between other groups. It sounds like this conference you're doing is similar to that. I mean, I know Alex is all over this issue, and he believes it's for real, and he talks about it, fairly regularly. So that's good. But we've got to get other people in the environmental movement to recognize it and to work together. So I'm going to run some ideas past you in terms of strategic partners. And I want to see if you've made any efforts to create connections with them, okay? Now, the first one is, well, we know that most of the release is coming from regular airplanes, right? Regular domestic flights. Is that not the case?
I would not say most, but you certainly have domestic flights involved. If people Google Project Cloverleaf, they'll see what appears to be the outline for the use of commercial carriers with these programs with a much smaller payload. And it also supplements the airline industry, which we know that those in power are trying to supplement everything to keep the economy looking like it's afloat. And we have identified American Airlines, Lufthansa, Southwest, FedEx, I mean, the whole array of leaving particulate trails with flight tracker from the ground. Now, we're not implicating the personnel with these companies. We believe that there are, and data indicates that there are outside crews that service these systems. They're GPS operated, so we're not implicating the personnel of these companies. But there are commercial aircraft involved, and we definitely have a considerable number of military tankers involved. Again, we have film footage of them spraying KC-10s, KC-135s, C-17s. The list goes on. So there's a lot from both ends, Brian.
Okay. So has anyone approached the airline unions or pilot unions about this issue to try to garner some support? I mean, I'm sure the pilots are seeing this going on. They're flying.
That's a great question. Now, in regard to the union for servicing the aircraft, there has been several letters from union service personnel that were reprimanded, in some cases suspended, because they wanted to know why they were not allowed to work on these systems, that there were other crews brought in. So there is some data on that. We know with the amount of surveillance that happens now that anybody who says anything in any public forum is looked at. So that's quite chilling in the whole community. I've spoken to NOAA scientists myself, for example, just to give an indication of how afraid people are to speak out. A NOAA scientist said to my face, off the record, about climate engineering. We know about these programs. We're alarmed as hell. We have no First Amendment protection. We don't know what to do. So you have the same sort of attitude, I'm sure, everywhere. And that's why the Obama administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined. That's quite chilling to anybody who has a notion to speak out.
Right. Right. Well, there are ways to whistleblow without and hide your identity. So maybe that's something that they have to explore more seriously. Maybe you could offer some guidance on that, because we got to get people talking about this stuff, people in the know. But we have to somehow protect their identity, so they cannot be, pressured into stopping or they shouldn't lose their jobs for telling the truth. Let's face it.
Let's give another example. We just lost the third NASA scientist in a very unexpected and spectacular plane crash. This was a very outspoken NASA scientist working on very important climate-related data. It's somebody that we might have expected to hear something groundbreaking from, now dead. So are such events a shot across the bow of anybody else who might be considering speaking out? People can Google this. NASA scientist dies in plane crash. It happened 3 or 4 days ago. So, the stakes are probably much, much higher than we would like to believe.
Was he? Do we know what he was going to discuss, or any indication on that?
No, we just know that he was involved with very important research about how fast Greenland is melting down, all of which the power structure is trying to hide. They've desperately tried to hide so many things for so long, and quite successfully. I mean, how can you have UVB readings that are 1,000% higher than we're being told, and nobody knows? How is that possible? It's burning the bark off of trees, burning whales' backs, killing plankton, defoliating trees, and nobody knows? How can the system be so incredibly controlled? But it is. We have the Weather Channel. If anybody watches Weather Channel, it's like a comedy show. The degree to which they lie to try to explain away, and they're owned by Blackstone and a host of other Bain Capital. You know, the main cabal criminal players. So they try to explain away why it's snowing at 50 degrees and why there's ice storms at sea level, and then freezing temperatures don't pick up again till 5,500-foot elevation, or why now snowstorms aren't based on elevation anymore. You're either on the snow side of the storm or the warm side of the storm. We have winter storms in the lower 48, Brian, with moisture that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico. Since when? Because they can chemically ice nucleate. Anybody who doubts this, Google engineered snowstorms. You'll find a mountain of data. The Chinese government admitted they were turning what should be rain into snow with chemical ice nucleation. This science is there. The data is there for anybody who looks. So the bottom line, again, on speaking out, we have so many people in the system, meteorologists, agency scientists, USDA, U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Game. I know a lot of these people who are simply more worried about their retirement and their paycheck than they are the common good for the whole planet. That's sad, but it's true.
No, I know. I mean, our allegiance to the money god is the source of all these issues. If people are paid enough money, or if they see that their livelihood is at risk, most people will bow. And I think we've got to change this attitude, or we don't have a hope in hell of surviving. That's my attitude, anyways. My summation, because people have to. I'm telling you. I mean, I do this. I'm working on this now 3 years. I haven't received a cent in money, and I'm telling you, there's nothing. We were chatting about this by email. You know, you were saying it's great what I'm doing. I said, well, what else should we be doing? Is there anything else that we should be doing? I mean, it's the only issue out there that matters to me. We're killing the planet, folks. No religion is going to survive. No political system. You know, nothing is going to survive if we don't save this planet. It is the issue that creates the most common ground within our species.
You're correct, because there is no living thing on our planet that has not been harmed from these programs, from atmospheric microbes like syringe to soil microbes, clouds to the ground, everything in between. Every living organism has been harmed by this bioavailable toxic fallout, not to mention the disruption of the hydrological cycle, the shredding of the ozone layer. I mean, we could go on and on. So if we could get this issue out in the open, there would be an absolute shockwave around the globe. And although people by nature, especially in today's world, want to keep their head in the sand as long as they can, I would argue because of events that are unfolding on the ground, they will not be able to stay in that denial much longer. They will be forced to face this issue. And the seeds that we have planted in the meantime will enable people, once they are forced to wake up, which I would argue is soon, they will have a compass heading. They will understand how we got here. And they will understand that unless they get in the fight and help us completely change the direction of the Titanic that we're all currently passengers on, we will have no chance.
Yeah. Okay, I got another idea for you, Dane. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you've done this already. I just want to know how successful you were. You approached an independent weather station you had a demo there or something of that sort. To talk to the audience about that.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're referring to.
Okay, well, I think I heard you talking about this. Well, basically the idea is this: to have a demonstration at a weather station and say, hey, we want some time on your Weather Channel, or
Okay.
Pick an independent one. Don't pick some part of the Weather Channel network. They're all, we know they're bought and owned and paid for. But go to a smaller station and say, can we have some time to come on and discuss this really important issue? I thought you tried that strategy.
Well, actually, what you're referring to, now I'm clear, because it was Weather Channel. When you said weather station, I was a little thrown.
Okay.
There is a demonstration planned for the Weather Channel, and this is the goal of this particular demonstration. I'll publish a previous demonstration we just did at North State News because of their meteorologist. The point of such demonstrations, and one is coming up, I believe, on the 26th of January at the Weather Channel, and I believe Cynthia McKinney, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, will be there. And the point is this: to make known to those meteorologists at the Weather Channel, because they're the largest weather dissemination on the planet, to make known to them that we know they know this is going on, that we know that they know they're lying, and that we're going to make known to the public that they are lying for a paycheck, to make them accountable. And we have a website called disinformationdirectory.com. And the point of that site is when we find meteorologists who very, very aggressively lie for whoever they represent, disputing climate engineering, calling anybody who says it's happening a tinfoil hat wearing nutcase like John Coleman did, the former founder of the Weather Channel, that we hold them accountable. We put their public email out for everyone to see. We put their statements out so that they know, the public knows what they're doing, and that when this issue is finally out in the open, that perhaps they'll be held for trial in something that resembles the Nuremberg trials, because that's what needs to happen. Everybody who has participated in this, what can only be considered omnicide. This is omnicide, killing every living thing. That's what we're talking about.
Ecocide, omnicide, yeah, definitely.
That's right. So at this point, they should be put on trial, and that's the point of that type of demonstration. And this is how ludicrous it is, Brian. We have the whole climate science community discussing geoengineering, the spraying of these particulates in the atmosphere. We have to do it. We must do it. We have U.S. military talking about it. But if someone is so audacious as to say, hey, all the evidence indicate it's already happening, then they label you a nutcase for admitting to this obvious elephant in the room. We live in truly strange days, but people who care about their children, who want any possible chance of a future for their children, have to join us in this battle. They must.
Yeah, I totally agree, Dane. I think that's a great strategy. Now, there's something else. Through my show, I'm hoping to help organize a conference to look at all the planet killers, try to get everyone together. Now, these are the main planet killers. You're number one at geoengineering. Then I've got nuclear power, waste, and bombs. I've got third, industrial farming methods, chemicals, GMO, and false organics. Fourth, I got 84,000 other chemicals used as food additives, preservatives, cleaning products, getting into our water, soil, and air. Number five, we talked about this a bit, war and the release of DU. People, this stuff is active for 4.5 billion years. So we're dealing with this for the rest of the life of this planet. I mean, that is unbelievable. Number seven is mass deforestation, alteration of natural vegetation. Well, that fits in well with this too. But there are other, people are burning down forests. I mean, geoengineering is a part, but there's a lot of physical destruction going on there. And then the last one is the atmospheric contaminants from oil, gas, and coal, creating climate change, ozone depletion, ocean acidification, and weather disasters. Now, I'm sure you fit in there, but I want to try to get some of these global warmers and climate change people on board on this stuff. I mean, we got to find some way to get them on board, Dane, because I mean they have the power. I mean, they have the clout to bring this issue out and say, hey, no, this is an issue. We got to consider this too.
They do, and for them not to address this issue is the epitome, absolute epitome of hypocrisy. I've had several confrontations with the head of Sierra Club for Northern California. Last time he walked away from me because he couldn't take anymore, I suppose, when I pointed out to him that his actions have been pathetic, what they're doing amounts to mowing the lawn while the house is burning to the ground. They're not facing the issue that truly matters. In regard to a couple other issues that you mentioned, to tie this back into nuclear in one other major way, as the climate engineers destroy the Earth's natural protective layers, now, if we have a major CME, a major coronal mass ejection, and it shuts down grids around the globe, because climate engineering has shredded our natural protection from a CME, with grids shut down, we could have Fukushima times 100 or 200. So again, the equation becomes very complex and very exponential. We also have the fallout from Fukushima right now, because they're aerosolizing so much of the moisture over the Pacific. It's causing that moisture to migrate further. It's not raining out that radiation over the Pacific. Not that that's good for the ocean, but it's better than the radiation raining out on our heads. So from many different directions, again, climate engineering, so many roads lead back to it in a very negative manner. So it's a complex equation, but again, if we have a major CME, Brian, we're going to have a whole lot of Fukushimas.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, there's, you're right. I mean, we're weakening our natural defenses of this planet. And, I mean, I'm one who believes that we're already being helped by powers that we do not understand. I mean, we've done so much damage to this planet. It's just, I'm astounded that any life still exists here, because we've just, so many things we've been doing, and we're sort of, because our scientists have been hoodwinked into the wrong teleology, that we're not getting the goods. But, you know, anyone, I think, who's not been bought off by the money god, they're telling the truth. And there's a significant number of people from all those areas, the planet killers, as I call them, that I think are very credible. And I think if we could create some synergies between everyone, that I think it would help get the message out louder and clearer. Have you ever been on, oh no, before I go to that, I want to ask you, this conference that you're attending, that you're speaking at, it sounds to me like it's a bit of a synergy conference. Can you send me a link to that? And I want to talk about it on one of my future shows.
I absolutely will. It's called CalJam. That's exactly what it is. There'll be probably 2,000 to 3,000 medical people there. It's a very, very big event, very well organized, and that's exactly what it's about. So, and there are also those people in the science community, in some of these agencies, and I'm hearing from some of them, who have wrestled with their conscience enough now to realize that their retirements won't matter, their paychecks won't matter. If they don't do something now, nothing will matter. And some of these people are starting to step forward. I have a conference call tomorrow with an individual who could by himself put a break in the dam if he decides to step forward. So there are people stirring. There's a much, much bigger undercurrent of awareness than we realize. And I'm trying to unite the tribes, Brian, in that you have a lot of people in the anti-geoengineering community that have convinced themselves there's no global warming, there's no damage to the planet except geoengineering, as if geoengineering is the only thing that's damaged the planet, which is complete denial. We have, as you correctly mentioned, we have damaged the planet from so many directions. Where would you even begin?
Yeah.
And then we have the climate science community that acknowledges the damage, the warming of the planet, but in total denial about the aerosol spraying. So the attempt to try to stand on solid data always, in that with the anti-geoengineering community, that yes, the planet is in fact not just warming, it's in total meltdown. And again, we have some very big admissions of that today. New York Times front cover, 2014 warmest year ever, 13 of the warmest years ever since 2000. We have sea level rise now admitted 2 or 3 days ago, rising much faster than was previously disclosed. They're hiding everything. But if we could get people to stand on solid data in the anti-geoengineering community, realizing that climate engineering is making the warming worse, not better, that will give us a better chance to, at some point, join hands with the climate science community to point out to them, yes, we recognize there's a lot of problems, we're doing a lot of damage to the planet, but climate engineering has only made it worse, not better. That's the message we could unite on.
Okay, looks like we're going for another break, Dane. Last half hour coming up, folks. There's some pretty progressive stuff happening in Europe, and geoengineering is much more acknowledged over there, actually. But there's 36 cities in U.S. that have passed rights of nature statutes through their municipal governments. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that figure, no.
No, eh? So, trying to connect with these cities, I'm sure I can find out which ones they are, get a list to you, and then maybe we should, ask them to start suing the government for spraying them like cockroaches. Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. And again, this is why we're back to this issue. No matter what else is happening on the planet, and I would make the argument, and I don't think rationally it can be argued, industrialized society has no future. It's doomed. It's unraveling by the day. We cannot continue on this course. But no matter what challenge we face, whether it's the decimation caused by industrialized society, Fukushima, or many other issues, if we cannot think clearly, we will face no challenge. All of us are breathing this material. There's no question about that. We have the lab tests to prove it. We know the cognitive degenerating effect of these materials. So this is what I'm arguing. If we cannot think clearly, we will not face any challenge. And that's assuming they don't change this mix and make it much more lethal. What we know is coming down on us already is making us all dumber by the day. That's a medical fact. It's a mathematical fact. We have to face this issue. We have to expose this issue. And for the environmental groups to connect with them, absolutely. Whether it's GMO groups, I mean, all these things matter in and of themselves, but they will not matter, and we will not be able to face these challenges if we do not, first and foremost, plug the hole in the bottom of the ship that is climate engineering and the toxic fallout from it.
Yeah, well, I mean, a right of nature is not to be killed. I mean, that's number one. So any municipality with people that are wise enough to get these these things passed, I mean, I would think they'd be a natural ally for you. So I'm going to try to get you that list. And if you want to break the news about this interview with this guy, I'm sure I can find you a spot on the network. It doesn't have to be this time. There's open spots here and there, so maybe I can get you on again. If you make some big news with this other guy, you said you had somebody calling you. It sounds like a major whistleblower.
Well, I know. I mean, this is someone I know. I mean, I'm simply saying that this individual is globally known and could change this equation on his own, but he's working from behind the scenes. But I mean, I know this individual. I'm not guessing who it is. I met them personally, and I'm simply saying that people are coming forward now who have the means to change this equation. They realize that the reality they had imagined for themselves, whatever their position of power may be, is not going to happen. Not going to happen. We are on a very, very, very short time horizon on this current trajectory. We must change course completely and very, very soon, or we have mathematically no chance. So again, with all these environmental groups and so forth, yes, all of us, if we reach out to them and make them realize that we have to put the horse in front of the cart. I know many people in academia that their cup is already full, if you will. They've been very well indoctrinated that if something isn't on a peer-reviewed, establishment-ordained report, then it's not reality. Even if they can see it with their own eyes, it doesn't exist. And that kind of blindness we need to cure fast. And that's much of academia, if not most of academia. So we need to break that down. We need to get the people in the environmental groups to realize it's great to save a fish or a frog, but if the whole world dies, everything dies with it.
I think we have to recognize the validity of each issue and work together. I don't think the problem with the movement, as I've been studying it for the last 3 years, is that everyone has their killer planet scenario, and and they're all trying to claim the limelight. What I'm saying is instead of doing it that way, we bring everyone together and we say, hey, all these issues are important. We got to deal with them all. We're all toast. They all contribute to each other. That's the line I would want someone like you to take. We're all these issues are affecting each other and they're coming up with consequences that, quite frankly, we don't know. Right? There's a lot of things going on that we are not completely aware of the consequences because there's just so much toxicity going out there.
I agree to a point, and again, believe me, I would go to great lengths to save either a fish or a frog. I don't say that lightly. I mean, I escort spiders out of my house, so I care about everything. I'm simply making this point that if we're on a ship in the middle of the ocean, if the propeller's bent, maybe we could live a while with that. If there's a rod knocking in the engine, we could go a while with that. But if there's a gaping hole in the bottom, and that is every breath we take is laden with this toxic metal particulate that's killing us all by the day, I hope we come together on that, and then we can face all these other issues which need to be dealt with. I'm not making light of them at all, but I'm simply, from a mathematical standpoint, a medical standpoint, we can't continue to breathe this stuff in, or we won't be thinking clearly enough to do anything soon enough. 1 out of 3 in the continental U.S. now, Brian, 1 out of 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's and/or dementia, and the rest of us are somewhere in between a healthy diagnosis and a diagnosis like I described. None of us are firing on all neurons.
We got it here in my house. And speaking of, my sister's here. She's actually she's from the U.S. and she's like mainstream, like watches mainstream news, all that stuff. And she's the kind of person that we gotta, wisen up. So this is a question she has for you. She says, "Why haven't you been on CNN talking about this issue?" She's serious.
Because mainstream media's job is to hide this type of issue or marginalize it. If you Google David Pakman, Dane Wigington, that's a 15-minute interview from mainstream media hitman David Pakman. It's very telling, as his job, his agenda, was to marginalize this issue. He insisted, absolutely insisted on using, again, the chemtrails term, because that's the term they've marginalized. They don't want science. They don't want credibility, because they know if the public found out about this issue, there would be rioting in the streets. I personally spoke to one of the architects of the climate engineering programs, who I agreed to keep anonymous, which I will continue to do, but I know who he is. I recognize his name. He told me in the conversation, which I published, that if the public found out about these programs, and I'm quoting from him directly, they would seek out those responsible and shoot them or hang them, or shoot them or hang them, or shoot them in front of a firing squad or hang them. That's what he said. So the bottom line is they know the public will never accept having been sprayed like rats. Never. So mainstream media, we know who owns them. It's part of the military-industrial complex. Their job is to hide this. Anybody who thinks mainstream media is there to tell the truth needs to do a lot more investigating.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dane. That's why there's networks like this one going and going strong and educating millions around the globe about what's really going on.
Correct.
So, excellent answer, my man. Okay, now another strategic idea for you. How much? I did a lot of lobbying on the peace movement back in the '80s when I was a student with student governments. Now they have some, they have clout. They have an audience. Have you done any work with student governments in colleges and universities down in the U.S. or anywhere else on the globe?
We're trying. I've met with some students from Humboldt State University, which is a major environmental university in Northern California. I left them 200 commercial copies of DVDs with presentations, 2,000 colored glossy flyers. Met with 2 other Northern California colleges. We're trying to find contacts at other colleges. Again, the power structure has been very successful in distracting the population from what is unfolding around them. So these college kids are walking around with their iPhones and their Androids, and you could light the sky on fire, they wouldn't notice it. And we're trying to break this down because we do not have much time. I would be surprised, Brian, if we had very many months ahead of us without a complete overturning of our reality. We see the power structure pumping the stock market up to the moon, driving the oil price down to unbelievably low levels to artificially stimulate the economy. They've tried desperately to hide how radically the climate is unraveling, the species extinction rate, the biosphere is imploding. They're trying to hide everything they can while they're literally digging in and preparing for total societal collapse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, lots of facilities underground and whatnot. And like I say, they may have facilities off planet. I mean, there's no reason to think not after you see those bills being, shelved, without them saying no.
The Van Allen radiation belts are quite a barrier for anything with our current technology. And I can only speak to what we know we have here on the planet, and we know we have DUMBs, the deep underground military bases. They absolutely exist. We have film and photo of the entrances of the tunnel boring machines, which are called moles, some of which are 50 feet high, 5 stories high.
Nuclear powered.
Boring tunnels everywhere. And so, again, right now, the insanity of the human race taken as a whole is very difficult to comprehend. And the amount of people that are willing to go along with that, so long as they can keep their personal party going, is astounding. But it's coming to an end. There's simply too many converging catastrophes to be hidden for much longer.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Now, maybe we should talk a bit more, again, for the layperson about UVA, B, and C, and what's the difference in terms of the damaging effect of these rays? Because when I used to think, well, UV is UV, but no, there are different strengths, different wavelengths that are much more damaging to the planet and to ourselves.
There is. In fact, we're told by all major monitoring agencies that no more than 5% of all incoming UV should be UVB. Some agencies say 1%, but the rest say 5%. And the rest should be UVA. This is in bands, nanometer bands. So you have from 400 to 300 bandwidth is UVA. 320 to about 280 is UVB. 280 to 100 is UVC. Below 100 is X-ray. So what we're seeing now is about 55 to 60% of incoming UV is UVB, not 5%. UVB is much more harmful, 55 to 60%. And we're also now picking up UVC on the surface. That's the last band of UV radiation before X-ray. So we're not, these are smaller levels of UVC, but the fact that we're getting any is extremely alarming because we're told UVC stops 100,000 feet up in the atmosphere, and that's not the case anymore. It's literally frying the bark off of trees, as I mentioned earlier. It's cooking the upper branches. Trees are dropping their foliage to try to reduce their exposure. I mean, this is a cataclysm. No ozone layer, no terrestrial life on Earth. That's really simple. And we know the effect of putting particulates in the atmosphere. It shreds ozone.
Well, we also know that Chile, for a long time, the southern parts of Chile had no life because there was no UV there. No UV protection, no ozone, right? So we know what it does.
Correct. In fact, NASA earlier this year disclosed that they got some UV readings in Chile that were comparable to the surface of Mars. And they took those readings in 2003. People should Google this. ABC News covered this. Google UV radiation, NASA, ABC, you'll find this. But why did it take NASA? It took them 11 years to disclose this. Why? When they're getting UV readings that bad, why? And we have a massive northern hemisphere ozone hole that nobody is talking about. Nobody. And I challenge people again, Google it. Google northern hemisphere ozone hole. The Canadian government is threatening their scientists on the ozone research team. If they talk to media, there will be consequences. We have an attempt by governments around the globe to hide the totality of what is unfolding till the last moment. Again, I know this is a very sobering message, but all of us can help to turn the direction of the ship if we get up off the bench and join the fight. And this can be done very effectively. Educate yourself to some degree so you have some idea what you're talking about. And this is most important, Brian. Share credible data. We have flyers on Geoengineering Watch home site you can download for free and print wherever you're at. Pass a credible information flyer onto somebody. Don't just rant at them and point at the sky. Pass on credible data. There's also a website called Skyder Alert, SKYDER.com, that at least for the people in the U.S., they can use to send photographs of the sky to their local legislators. So we have tools. Arm yourself with credible data. Join the fight. Help us sound the alarm. If we could reach critical mass of awareness where this issue can't be hidden, we will see an immediate toppling of the dominoes. It will change our reality if we could expose this one issue in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. And you're always, what sort of other help can you use, Dane? I mean, we're getting near the end of our time here, so I want to make sure people know how they can help your organization to spread the word. And I totally believe that people have got to start suing their government or suing the Defense Department. I mean, we got to take some very old actions here. They're basically trying to kill everyone, and that's a serious offense.
I agree with you. Those actions do need to be taken. But back to the critical mass, if we reach critical mass, lawyers around the globe will realize they will die with the rest of us. Their children will die with the rest of us if they do not help in this cause. And in the moment we reach critical mass, we'll have lawsuits going everywhere from people's own home computers. They can do a tremendous amount of good by locating groups, organizations, and individuals that would care if they only knew. Find those contacts and send them. On Geoengineering Watch, we have what's called a Flaming Arrow package. You'll find this on the home site in the upper left. It's already prepared, a letter of introduction to this issue, a lot of informational links. So all you have to do is send that package out. to these groups and organizations that don't know, so that they'll have a lot of solid, credible data put in their laps. Start spot fires of awareness. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, well, I think you've got to create some connections with these rights of nature groups, 36 cities in the U.S. I think that's a good place to start, too. I think you've got natural allies there. So
we need help. We need help doing that. I mean, we need people to join the fight to help us make those connections. I agree they're important. We just need people to join us in that fight and not sit on the bench and cheer from the sidelines. We need people to actually stand up and march with us.
How many researchers do you have working for you? Is it just you, or are there other people helping you?
You know, I have people that I call on for various issues, but there's only a few of us involved with this, and that's webmasters and so forth. So there's, you know, it's not some massive organization here. There's nobody directly connected. We rely on research with exchange of data, but that's it.
Yeah. So people who have a flair for research, have a flair for writing, who know how to network. I don't care what your skill is. I mean, we're all on the line here, folks. Contact Dane. There's a million ways to contact him. What's the best way to reach you, Dane?
Through geoengineeringwatch.org is the best way. I apologize to those that I can't get back with. I have probably 100 messages a day that I'm unable to respond to because there's so many coming in. But what I would encourage those people to do, pick up the ball and carry it yourself with the instructions that we have on Geoengineering Watch. Start spot fires of awareness everywhere you can. If you're playing football and the ball lands in front of you in the middle of the field, you don't stand and stare at it and waiting for someone else to tell you what to do. We have instructions there, and help us to carry the ball. If you can't reach anybody with our site for an extended time, I apologize, but we do have instructions there. And again, if we continue to start these spot fires everywhere, Brian, they will merge into a blaze that can't be put out, the media can't extinguish, and that's the point we need to reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point. Well, I understand it's. Are you at 8% now of public awareness? That's what I read that.
Well, the figure's been thrown around, and I have absolutely no idea who came up with that. I know of no credible data for that figure. I think it was drawn out of a hat.
Really?
I do.
That's too bad. I thought, because they say at 10, then you start to get maybe some mainstream attention, some political. Well, you got this one politician helping you.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, where's the location of that Weather Channel protest? You didn't say where it was.
Atlanta, Georgia. That's where the Weather Channel headquarters is. And I would argue this, the amount of percentage of people that have heard about this issue is greater than 8%. I would not want to give a figure, but we have billboards up in a number of places around the country. I'm not saying that what percentage of people who agree that's happening, but the percentage of people that have heard of it, I think, is considerably higher percent, and it's growing by the day because the entire climate science community is discussing this issue. So I think the percentage of people that are at least aware of this as an issue is considerably higher. And again, we'll reach a critical point, and we're getting closer when experts start to come out of every shadow. And once we put a crack in the dam, Brian, we'll have experts pouring from every corner because they know this is going on.